Hi everyone. So it's been a while from everyone here. I'm not sure what to call the show. I guess we're a little bit China talk,
A little bit rock and roll.
a little bit rock and roll, a little bit Into the Rift, a little bit Law and Order SVU. But yeah, since IEM Katowice is slowly upon us, starts tomorrow, we figured that we'd do an IEM preview for you guys. So let me introduce the panel. We have Kelsey Moser. She writes for The Score. She covers LPL, EULCS. She is currently in China right now, where she was granted asylum after leaking secret information about the sixth season of Game of Thrones. We're happy she is not behind bars. We have another writer from The Score, Emily Rand. She covers NALCS. She covers LCK. Emily did not seek asylum because she leaked information about How I Met Your Mother, and she didn't realize it's been off air for 2 years. We have, last but not least, we have Stephen Wen, who covers NALCS and LJL for Esports Heaven. He's the host of League of Legends talk show Into the Rift, and he is a professor of anime at Harvard University.
Damn it. Oh, no one was supposed to know that.
I mean, he's very popular among his students. Anyway, how's everyone doing today?
Pretty well.
Nice. Okay, so let's just get to the meat of why we're here. There's been a bit. We've had like some speculation about how, results for IEM. LoL Esports released their power rankings, which some people agreed with, some people disagreed with. So I actually thought we'd start out the show by doing our own rankings. So let's just start. Instead of starting from the top teams, let's start who we considered the weakest of teams. So let's start. So who should we start with towards the bottom? I believe you guys think. Who do you guys want to start off with? TSM or Origin?
Just segue naturally into this. So, who is the shittiest team between TSM?
Yeah,
and...
let's
No.
exactly.
Let's start with Team SoloMid, just
All right.
because. Why not? It's everyone's favorite, right? TSM.
They won last year, right?
Yes, they're the reigning champions. Okay,
Yeah,
this is important.
They technically are, I think, the reigning IEM world champions. So.
Yes, this is why they were invited back, actually. So they're the reigning champions. So, go ahead.
So we have so we talked about this earlier, where I guess there was a sort of consensus that TSM were towards the bottom, even though Esports had them ranked pretty low. Which let's talk about why, because at the moment they're ranked fourth in the NALCS, which isn't too bad. They have what was believed to be a pretty good roster on paper. You know, they were excited that, they had Yellow Star come in, who was lauded as one of the great shot callers of our time.
Oh,
He's
yes.
no high, but still. So why is TSM low? Let's start with you, Emily, since you are apparently the resident North American expert
Of the Score, you know.
Yeah, it'd be me or Steven. But why is TSM so low? So I was super excited about this roster, and I've been really sad. I think the main thing that you have to consider with TSM, it's that they have some good games, and then they have some really bad games. And going into this tournament, they're coming off of one of their weakest performances, which was this loss against Team Liquid this past week. That was not good, to say the least. I think the main problem with this team, like initially when I looked at the roster, I was like, man, this is such a great roster. The only thing I'm worried about is resource distribution. But I think beyond resource distribution, because you look at Bjergsen, you look at Doublelift, and you're like, whoa, where is all the gold gonna go? Because Svenskeren was also kind of known as a carry jungler previously. But that's actually not the problem. The problem is just that this team sometimes doesn't seem to be communicating whatsoever. And I do think that Double Lift is obviously a very laning focused AD carry. Um, and Yellow Star is more of kind of a roaming, like overall, like you said, he was the shot caller for Fnatic. He does a lot better when kind of, teams listen to him and he gets to, I guess, dictate the pace of the game a little bit more. And on this team, it's definitely more of kind of a democratic approach. So you see, it's a lot of miscommunication issues. Like, you can't point to any one player and be like, oh man, they're terrible, because like that's not really what's going on. I think Spence Garen is definitely a little lost on this team, whether it's because he was previously receiving direction and now isn't, or he just doesn't know like where to go and how to communicate with people. I think communication is kind of the primary issue with this roster, in my opinion. They have the capability to play really well. They just are wildly inconsistent, and their lows are pretty low.
I feel like every region attending this tournament has a team that is like that. And is not necessarily actually attending this tournament, but you look LGD, China, Korea has Longju. You have Origen, who is at this tournament, also in that category. So I think that this is something where a lot of teams looked at talent they could have without necessarily thinking of how they would fit together logically, and just said, oh, this player is good, and I know my current team, the current players that I want to keep on my roster want to play with this guy, right? So we're going to contract him, and maybe the players haven't thought about, or we haven't thought about, the value of the previous player or some of these other aspects. Of course, this isn't necessarily why these teams are failing either. Some of these teams had problems before. TSM never really had that great crisp communication, right? And they're ranked 4th, and we're seeing teams that are higher than them have had more kind of rejuvenated or roster changes that focus a little bit more on team play and cohesiveness. Like Immortals, I did interviews with Noah Winston where he talked about he really wanted to focus on getting well-rounded players who weren't maybe necessarily considered superstars, right? And then you have Counterlogic Gaming,
they went
who,
into the same
yeah, they had a very
bar at the
similar
tournament.
approach where they just wanted to have players who work better together, not necessarily double lift. There was this huge explosion about that, which I'm sure everyone remembers, right? So the teams above them are thinking a little bit more, or at least publicly thinking a little bit more about how these teams can communicate and work together, and Team SoloMid didn't necessarily do that within their own construction. So I think that this is something that is going to be a problem for them in particular. Origen is a bit different, but we'll get to them.
Yeah, we'll get to Origin next, but I want to just continue about TSM. Just Steven. So at the moment, TSM allegedly, even though they have like these inconsistent problems, problems of inconsistency, at the moment it seems that a lot of the teams coming into IEM face that same problem. So what kind of keeps them? What sort of ranks them below those teams? What do you think, at least for you, Steven?
Well, I mean, yes, they're wildly inconsistent, which means they could end up working really well together in this tournament, or they can just flop on their faces. But like, because of that inconsistency, you can't like really bet on them unless you really want a high payout or something, or you really believe in them. But that's the thing, like, because they're not consistent, you can't objectively say that this team is better than another team. They could be, but they are most likely not going to.
All right, so would you rank them at like the same level as, you know, say like Origin, Fnatic, maybe even Ever?
No, I'd rank them below. Just because
Okay.
like the other teams have shown more consistency with their play, and it's like, I don't know. TSM is just their problem. The reasons for their consistency are like so across the board that you can't even like pin down why they're consistent like to one fact, right? Like maybe for other teams you can be like, oh, make this they're not good at lane swaps, or they're not good at team fighting, or they're not good at skirmishing, they're not good at like objective control. No, TSM is just inconsistent across every single like everything. Like everything is inconsistent.
Okay. So let's
That's
talk.
not to say that like you're gonna see one game where they're bad at everything, but like if you go, I'm not trying to say that they're dumpster fire. I mean like when you look at their games,
No, they're not.
it's one
Yeah.
different thing that they're doing wrong that game, and like it's like one day they're just not doing the lane swap well, but everything else is okay, or they're like the lane swap's fine and everything's okay, but then the team fight goes wrong, or the engage goes wrong. Like it's something different every time.
It's
They
reasonable.
learned how to lane swap though after 3
They
games.
did.
I was so happy because I love Haunter, and it was killing me to see him like sent into lane at level 1, and then he'd just get killed. Ugh.
Something for me that I just find interesting is I feel like one of their problems is they have like this problem with how to respond to their opponents and sort of like make their next moves, which is funny to me because they brought in the Yellow Star who was supposed to be, this, I think he was considered probably like one of the best players in the world last season just because of this what's the word?
Leadership. I don't know.
This like well like I mean like it's like yes his leadership qualities but like it's almost like this story built around him, he's been to every world and stuff, like there has to be something there and they bring him in. And one of the things I remember about Fnatic last year is like there were times during their regular season during summer that they were close to losing and then at the end like they just capitalized on like some like last minute mistake their opponent made and they just came back, and it just I don't see that same thing in this TSM roster, which is very interesting to me because it's like I feel like I don't know, either that Yellowstar can't do the same thing with this team, or maybe that some of this praise we were giving him was like a little bit too much last split. I don't know, but yeah, it's just one of those things that that sort of surprised me about this team so far during the springs, but yeah.
Well, they mean it seems like they tried to do that with the first like week or two of games, where sometimes you just see Yellowstar engage like Alistair pulverized headbutt combo, and then no one would follow. I mean that problem hasn't persisted, but that's not because everyone's following Yellowstar all of a sudden. Not necessarily. It's like it's either he's being more conservative with when to go in compared to before, or they're just not on the same page. I'm not sure. I don't have the comms, so I can't say.
There are a couple of things on the subject because if you look at Yellowstar's career, which I don't know, some people do that on their free time. He was never really. He had to kind of learn support in this meta where the champions are pretty squishy. And his first game, he on support in pro play. He mispositioned so many times within just the first 3 minutes that he died twice, right? And had to in the first 3 minutes of the game. So since then, he's always played really, really conservatively in lane, really far back. It's almost like he was never taught or never had the opportunity to sort of develop aggressive laning instincts. You look at TSM across the board, except for maybe Haunter, like Bjergsen and Doublelift always took it upon themselves. We have to win our lane because we have to carry the team. It's a very Forgiven-esque mentality where you want to put the ability to win on your shoulders by dominating the laning phase and then being able to convert that into a game impact later. Whereas I don't think Yellowstar has ever really had that mentality. And he became this roaming support in the 3v0 meta, kind of, where... So theoretically, right, this should be an okay meta for him. Because if you take down a turret and you want to stay in lane after you take down a turret, you need to roam a lot more. You need to ward a lot more. But I kind of feel there's this conflict in watching that style paired with the way Doublelift wants to play that is just going to be really, really difficult to overcome unless one of them fundamentally develops in a different way. So that's... Yeah, that's really interesting. to see. The other,
Right.
yeah, the other aspect is Doublelift, even when I interviewed him at San Jose, said that we're all the players who, when we were on our teams, we had this voice, right? We had this dominating voice, and we were the ones who spoke louder than the other people. Maybe not necessarily like made the calls, but we're talking all the time. And so now we're in this position where everyone is trying to be that person again, and there's not necessarily a clear voice for that they can all stand behind and trust. Whereas Yellowstar's personality isn't necessarily a dominating, commanding presence. Even though he's a good shot caller and a leader, I feel like if you have this kind of group who all are talking over each other, that might be a situation where he's not given the opportunity to be the shot caller. So we'll see.
So basically, too many chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't want to talk about them too much yet because I'd rather do that once we're already talking about the brackets. So let's move on to Origen. So Origen, we mentioned this before, are very similar to TSM when they in the spring season. We had really high expectations of this team, but the only difference is Origen, they came out of Worlds having done really well, and they, their weakest link was often talked about to be Xpeke, and this news came that Power of Evil, who was, probably one of the biggest and most successful rookies in Europe last season, was joining the team. So essentially, that one weak link was now no longer there, and we still had like most of the core strengths of the team. They come in, they go to IEM San Jose. Yeah, they win it pretty convincingly, if I recall correctly. And
Yes.
people are just like everyone, like even you guys, like believe that Origen were going to be the #1 European team this split. So far, this team is just completely floundering. They are saying they're middle of the pack is just like
The EULCS calls them the gatekeepers because they beat
Oh
all
my
the
God.
bottom tier teams, but they lose to all of the better teams. So
yeah, and it's just I think and even like Origin saying like, oh, we're a better team than this. We have coaching issues, this and that, and it's just like, yeah. So they're going into IEM Katowice, and it's sort of like, I don't know. To me, I felt like I would have ranked them personally below TSM just because it's just, I don't know. Like when I watch this team, I'm just like really confused. Like Soaz can go Soaz sometimes carries the game, and then other games he just is literally anchoring his team down. It's just, what's the deal with them, Kelsey?
I really do think the reason why I drew the parallel to TSM is not necessarily because I think that they're the super team or that they never had a good communication system. It's just that when you watch how they lose games, it's very clearly somewhat communication based, just because there are so many. It's weird because they have really high Baron control in the EULCS. I think they're tied for second place in Baron control. So they get a lot of Barons, but they focus on fighting over Baron and Dragon quite a bit. And sometimes when you watch these fights, they'll get the Baron, but then they'll lose the entire team fight because there will be Amazing and Soaz jumping over the wall, and then the rest of the team is left in the Baron pit, and they just get collapsed on and killed, or something like this happens almost all the time, almost every Baron fight that they have. So that's a really interesting aspect of them. I think one thing that they used to have that I feel like has fallen off for them in the past 2 weeks is they would have a really strong duo lane. Okay? Mithy and Sven, as he's now called, I keep mentally calling him Niels, will play the 2v2 pretty well. They'll get a bunch of gold onto Niels, and then everyone will focus on peeling for Niels, turning Niels into this wrecking ball. That hasn't worked as well for them because I feel like Niels has maybe because of the pressure, positioned increasingly aggressively, so the team has started to build more compositions around SOAS. But as Andy just pointed out, SOAS has been a bit inconsistent with how well he's able to perform. And I think SOAS is much more comfortable. Like he's shown in the past that he's able to play carries. That's great. But he's also even personally admitted he's much more comfortable playing more of a supportive top laner role, right? Where he wants to facilitate the success of other members of his team. And I think he's usually pretty strong in that regard. But they're in this position where this is happening, and there have been jokes about how they can only succeed if Lulu isn't banned. Power of Evil hasn't necessarily been a huge carry threat. I do think Origen's team fighting, when they're talking well, is pretty good, right? And European teams, they mostly all have a baseline understanding of lane swaps. The only teams that I see sort of fumble lane swaps are like Fnatic sometimes, and Giants, because Giants are bad. But that's
This
That's-
isn't about Giants.
that's it though. So I think that Europe can, if they want to, in their group, Origin probably have maybe the best understanding of lane swapping. I haven't really seen enough ever to have a good opinion on that, but they can probably get leads in their group by using that to their advantage. The question just then becomes whether or not they throw them because their communication system is so bad.
All right, so my question is, so going back to this, like, almost not so jokingly joke that they're the gatekeepers where they have an easier time against the bottom half of the teams. Do you think that the teams in their bracket would are better than the teams that they normally have a pretty like easy time beating?
I would say that the Ever Royal and we had
TSM.
TSM, maybe not TSM.
Oh,
TSM maybe.
I meant
Yeah,
I
okay,
meant, like,
TSM.
mhm.
But I think they're like all of them are better than Giants. I'll say that. Like
Okay,
that's
not saying much.
that's not
but
a
okay.
difficult statement to make. I think Rocket are developing, but they're still not very good. People know how I feel about Elements. So yeah, I would say generally this group is a little bit better than those teams. So
Do you guys feel like because it's not like Origin were without problems last lit, but you know they had their very slow, almost weak early game, but they seem to compensate well for that. Do you think that they still face those troubles this time around, or has something else regressed that is causing them to underperform? Anyone is looking to answer.
I just have like a quick answer to this. I do think
Okay.
they make the same communication-based errors that they did. Amazing gets caught out, and so this meta is definitely more punishing. The fact that there are some stronger teams in Europe now, besides just Fnatic, is also more punishing. So I think that this is an issue we're seeing that has persisted from the past splits as well.
Right.
I also.
All right.
Oh no, the only thing I was gonna say is I also look at the communication systems. Like you were asking, okay, where are these other three teams on the same level? And like this group is honestly such a toss up for me because I'm not on the RNG like hype train whatsoever. But like you look at the communication systems of the other two teams. RNG is okay if they listen to Mata, then like he'll corral them into a win. And Ever, they know how to communicate with each other pretty well, even when they make mistakes. So I think when you're talking about like Origin and even TSM, the fact that it's very specifically like internal communication errors is what ends up placing them slightly below these other two teams, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. Is there anything left? You guys have anything left you want to say about Origin?
Nope.
None?
They've
Okay.
already covered it.
So, who should we talk about next? Since we're going from weakest to I guess, the most competitive. Do you want to say Fnatic or Fnatic?
We have
Maybe Ever.
Fnatic, Ever, and RNG are kind of all.
are the three we have
Okay.
here.
Okay, so Fnatic next.
May as well just
Okay.
get Europe out of the way, you know. Knock
Okay,
them down.
okay. Okay. Okay,
God.
so Fnatic. Fnatic, I don't know. Fnatic are very weird to me because they lost their, I guess, I don't know. It's hard not to think that Huni and Reignover were like their linchpin because they pretty much were like far and ahead, like the strongest European team last split. They had like this enormous win streak. They leave, join Immortals. Immortals like until last week had this enormous win. So it's like you have to like, as much as like people were saying Huni is like overrated, Reignover has like predictable jungle pathing. Like it's like we have to like give them like credit at this point where credit is due. They have like a certain X factor that when they work together, they make magic happen. Not to say like that like both like the other members of Fnatic and Immortal have, are pretty good on their own rights, but anyway. So anyway, they were replaced by Gamsu and Spirit. Gamsu, who went on Dignitas, unremarkable to say the least. We had Spirit on WE, who was running a marathon with like the entire world on his back, and we were almost just like saying like how he evolved to be the strongest jungler because he had like these training weights on. So they're on Fnatic now, and Fnatic has just not had the same success as last split. I think we can agree on the fact that the biggest difference would be that Reignover was a very supportive jungler. He ganked for Huni, made Huni into like this wrecking ball. He ganked for Febiven. Now we have Spirit, who's very resource hungry himself because Spirit, like how he was on World Elite, it wants to carry. Not a bad thing, but it doesn't fit to how Fnatic, are used to playing. So, thoughts on Fnatic? One of you. Start.
Someone else talk because I talked about the entire Origin thing. So
Okay, Steven, do you have any thoughts on this Fnatic lineup and how their chances are in IEM?
Gamsu is like the poor man's Huni. Like if he gets ahead, well, if he gets ahead, he does really well. But like, he's more exposable than Huni was because he doesn't have like Spirit isn't his Reignover. Spirit's just kind of literally doing his own thing in his own jungle on Italy every fucking game, and it's only just recently learned how to give over the Rift Herald to other people on the team, and probably does so reluctantly, or does so at the promise of fine steak dinners afterwards. But either way, like the dynamic isn't the same, and Gamsu is much more exploitable. As for the rest of Fnatic, actually I don't know. Like that's like the biggest like argument for me when I'm thinking about the new Fnatic lineup. I mean that's just my point, but like I think it's much more exploitable to not have the reliable duo of Reignover Huni.
Do you guys think
go ahead.
that I'll let you see your point in a second. Do you guys think that Fnatic's problem, at least one of them, is they're trying to succeed with the same dynamic, but with two players that operate very differently than how Huni and Reignover performed?
Possibly. I think they're definitely, because my concern with this team was whether Spirit was going to get out of like solo queue, I have to carry mentality. And obviously, as we've just covered, that hasn't really happened. But I do, like, when I watch this team, I see them trying new things. I see them trying to, I guess, communicate with one another, if that makes sense. Whereas we just talked about the systems of, like, Origen and TSM, where they're kind of all either reluctant or, like, something isn't working. Like, I get the sense that Fnatic is trying, and they do well sometimes and they don't do well at other times. But in this group, I think there's like the main problem for Fnatic at this tournament is their group is a little bit tougher. Like if they were in the other group instead of Origen, I'd be like, oh, Fnatic will probably make it out. Just because I think like they still have some smarts about them, but I don't know. It's tough. And the Spirit thing is really tough. I'm looking at his record right now, like the different junglers he's played, and this should be like the perfect carry meta for him because it's like previously Graves and then Quinn, Kindred, Nidalee, his last game, Lee Sin. So who knows? Maybe he'll just pull a WE like he did last year and carry Fnatic to the
Be even more cynical and
finals.
keep more resources to himself.
Yeah.
The thing that differentiates Fnatic from TSM and Origen for me is because when you look at them, they obviously have problems talking with Spirit or conveying the information to Spirit, and sometimes Spirit will just go in, and the other team is like, why? Because
Why does that sound so familiar?
honestly, the Spirit just goes in.
He just does.
Yeah, it's a Spirit thing. But the difference I see is that listening to some of the interviews, it's very clear that they have an idea of the kind of team they want to be, that they understand their flaws. And when we talked about TSM and Origen, we're kind of saying, well, their flaws are here, and Steven is saying they're inconsistent across the board. But Fnatic, you can point to, this is the problem that they need to work on, right? This is the problem that they already know is a problem, and they're working on fixing it. There are actually a bunch of really interesting interviews with Marcel from The Score, aka Dexter, who talks
I forgot he has a real name.
in detail, with Reckless and Clyde about the communication system they're trying to establish, where Reckless was previously trying to do everything, and now Clyde is working on developing communication around where they want to ward with Spirit. So this is relieving some of the pressure from Reckless as well. Also, I think that if they improve their vision, which for me, Fnatic's biggest in-game weakness is vision, and it's part of the reason why Spirit just goes in sometimes, is because he has no idea who's there or not. So if they improve vision, also this will open up Febiven, because when I see Febiven as a player, I think of him as someone who takes the information and he takes the safe opportunity to have a game impact. He sees someone isolated and he reacts right away, but he has to have that information. And Febiven himself has really, really low vision stats, really, really low wards per minute. He just doesn't ward very well. So if you have Spirit, who's building these really selfish builds, and Febiven, who isn't warding, you have really low vision control on the Fnatic team, and that's something that I think they could easily fix just by having exercises or putting word quotas in scrims or things like that. That's something you can fix, right? So this is why I think that Fnatic are a little bit stronger than Origen and TSM. But as Emily pointed out, unfortunately, every single other team in their group is stronger than them. So.
Okay, that's fair enough. Another thing I didn't really touch upon was I talked about how they tried to plug and play their Korean players. It's just okay, we'll just take 2 more. So one thing that I didn't touch upon was that I talked about how Yellow Star was considered to be their natural born leader who was their messiah and whatnot. Not like Messiah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Just China jokes. So, they had Noxiac for a while. That wasn't working out. And they have this new guy. What is it? Clyback. So, I mean, whether or not the Yellow Star's departure is one of the reasons for their decline is put into question just because we talked about earlier how he's not bringing that same skill to TSM or at least it's not translating well. So how much do you think of it is how much do you think the change of the support role has affected how this team performs?
I definitely think it's an issue because they don't have a communication system in place. They have a good idea of how to build one, but
Mm-hmm.
as Reckless himself said, like me being the shot caller and the AD carry is not super ideal. So it's not as good as it could be, and I don't think it will ever be the same level of macro play that we saw from last year's Fnatic, but I think it can get to a point where it's pretty good.
Okay. Next team. So shit. Who do you guys have ranked as your next as the next team? RNG.
Ever, RNG, whatever. It's
Okay,
fine.
so let's just do, you know what? Let's do Ever. Okay, I think it's funny to bring up RNG lower just because it's like people like think they're better than they are, but let's talk about Ever just because. Okay, so I'll admittedly say that I don't know that much about this team just because I don't watch KR Challenger and the funny thing to me is so Ever was kind of like this team that they got Ares and they what they okay so Kespa Cup comes along. They pretty much I don't want to say steamroll. Their record was like 5-3, but they beat SKT. Granted, they were like fresh, like off vacation, but they won. That was like a giant shocker to everyone because basically, I think it's believed that every single one of their sets were upsets in that they won.
Yeah.
Then they qualify for I IEM which one was it? Cologne. They win IEM Cologne. They did they beat QG 3-0?
No. It was. I don't think so, right? I think QG
No,
beat.
3-2.
Yeah.
Oh,
It was 3-2.
in the final?
Yeah. It was really close. It was the maximum number of games. I
Okay,
just
but
don't
Yeah,
remember.
I was surprised, 'cause I was not
okay,
expecting
regardless,
anything
this was
of
this,
it. Yeah,
this
it was
was like
2-3 Ever.
Yeah.
oh, it was two oh okay. I thought it was like a sweep, but okay,
No.
regardless, they win this tournament, and this team who like, you know, is just surprising everyone. Coincidentally, did not qualify for LCK, so they sort of like disappear off the radar. Athena gets bought by EDG. So and who was it that benched himself because of
It was
Key.
their support.
Okay, so basically they kind of fall off everyone's radar unless you really watch Carrot Challenger. They were doing like well in Carrot Challenger. I think they're second. They're not
second,
first, but they're
yeah.
second. So they're sort of like to most people like coming like back into the spotlight, and I think everyone sort of forgot about them because most people do not watch KR Challenger. It's like I'm sorry if you watch
Even
KR
Koreans
Challenger.
don't watch KR.
Koreans don't watch KR Challenger. Like, but okay. Like even there was even a point where we like joked that they're like a net cafe team, and we won't
They're
do that
not.
because
Yeah.
lest we anger some people. But okay,
Someone can't take a
so-
joke, Dom.
Okay, so they're back into the spotlight. What do we think about them? Because you guys actually believe they're better than how I get. I don't know. I think LoL Esports ranked them pretty low. I mean, I guess that's understandable since like they lost. I guess I think Keed is back. Finally is not is off the bench. They don't have Athena anymore. Who was? Do you guys believe? Yeah. So
It's Tempt.
Temp. Yeah. So they have Temp now. Do you guys think that they're the same team as they were before?
Kind of, actually.
Elaborate.
I think that Tempt actually fulfills a really similar role to Athena, where he just kind of they put him on champions with a lot of wave clear, and he keeps mid lane pushed up, which allows them to play around. Like they play around globals. If you watch them recently, they do know how to do like the very lovely season 6 lane swap, and then everything, the entire game pauses for a good like 10 minutes or so. So they know how to they know the current meta. They're pretty at home with that. they just recently lost to MVP. And a couple things I noticed in that set. First of all, I believe it was the first one that Key was back on the team because there are rumors of him elo boosting, and so basically it was either like a very recommended self benching, from what I know. Yeah, where he just kind of didn't play. And their substitute support Totoro played. And if you don't know anything about Key, he's kind of one of the primary reasons that they actually went through the Caspa Cup and did as well as they did.
Shout out to his Bard play, in case you
Yeah,
guys forgot.
if you want to go back and see some sick Bard play, go and watch that. And also, it'll be interesting to see if people research them and ban it against him because he's just really good on that champion and can control pretty much everything the team does with that specific champion.
QG banned it against them every game, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
And you should. There's
Actually,
no reason you should.
I think H2K didn't, and he didn't pick it, which was interesting to me. But go ahead.
The thing with Ever is that, like, if you've seen, if you watch Korea and you've seen a team like Kongdu Monster, or you've seen a team a bit like CJ Entis, but without their mid laner now, BDB, although at least they have Mad Life to like call the shots. They're about that level in terms of their understanding of the game. I think Kongdu Monster, formerly known as EM Fire, is like the most apt comparison to about where this team is at. I think they have better players for sure because Hippo is terrible and Crazy is usually the one they try to snowball. But aside from that, just like their overall understanding of the game and the current meta, I think if teams know how to do that lane swap and then kind of force themselves aggressively onto Ever a little bit earlier, they won't do as well. I know in one of the MVP matches specifically, Ever seemed to have no idea how to teamfight around a Kindred ult. And so that was really concerning, and that was like a huge reason why MVP won, because Ever would have been winning these team fights. They were very well coordinated. And having Key back, I think, lends a lot to that, to be honest. But they also, their opponents weren't dying, and then as soon as the Kindred ult went up, MVP would just kill them and take objectives. So that was unfortunate. And that's about where this team is at, I would say. So like bottom level around like Kongdu Monster.
Okay,
level.
so if they were so basically if they were in the LCK, they'd be like bottom tier.
They'd be better than the team they lost to initially, who made it back in my opinion, which was Spenu Sonic Boom, which has kind of been like a very big disappointment. But yeah, they'd be able to upset teams occasionally, and I think they are really good at taking advantage of like new meta shifts. But other than that,
so we get it. They're towards the round. So I have two. Okay, so several questions. First, do we believe that as essential as Keed was to setting up their victories, has he been practicing with the team?
That I don't know. There were some times in fights where it did look like he was a little disjointed and off. So I would assume that a lack of, not even like general scrim time, but just a lack of competing in Challengers Korea with the team has definitely affected their team fights and their overall communication. So that is something to look into, because there were a couple times where he was either ahead of the team or behind the team, and his individual play was still very good.
Okay, so the second thing I wanted to ask is, their success came during in the off season where teams were not really practicing. So how to properly gauge a team strength is very difficult. So they're coming in now, as you say. If they were their approximate level would be like a low tier LCK team, better than Spenu Sonic Boom, but like along the lines of like I can't say that name.
Yeah,
Kongdu Monster. Yeah, I can't say that. Yeah, but and so they're in the same group as. Okay, so we've said that the other teams have their own set of inconsistencies, but why do we believe that they should be ranked higher than, say, like bottom of the barrel for IEM? Like, what makes them better than the other teams in their bracket? You know, the Origins, the TSMs, the RNGs. Like, why is that?
Well, this bracket that's why I hate this bracket, because it's honestly like a toss up for me. But the reason why I'd rank them slightly above is because I think they do have pretty good coordination. They have a good understanding of how objective trading should work. And I think with Key back, you'll at least see them be on the same page. And that's actually why I compare them to Kongdu Monster, because Kongdu Monster is a team of players where they might have like one standout individual player who's pretty good, but the rest of the team, it's subpar talent for an OGN team. And the way they win games is actually just by being on the same page and by being able to communicate with one another. And so against some of these other teams, they're having communication issues or internal issues, talking to one another, or, you know, having one member just be not on the same page, or just general inconsistencies. I think that this is a team that would be able to exploit that simply by being stronger as a unit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and do you?
But
and
again,
guys...
like, I guess the addendum to that is even that's up in the air, because Key's absence definitely did affect the team a bit.
Yeah, that was something that, you know, was a giant question mark for me. What do you guys think? Do you think that do have like a leg up on the other teams in their bracket?
I think Ever, the reason I haven't seen as much Ever as Emily, but from the games that I have watched from them, to me it seems like Ever have a more defined playstyle than, for example, TSM or Origin, which we've ranked them above. And that, in particular, in this matchup, they focus a lot on getting top ahead, which is something, as we've already identified problems with the Origin, could become pretty useful. I also think it would be fairly useful against TSM, because I do think Concert is kind of still awkward in their dynamic. So, yeah, stylistically, within their own group, I think Ever have an okay position, and they seem to understand how to work as a team. And there are a lot of underutilized ways to use multiple globals that I think Ever have a pretty good idea to use on how to use them, especially in the current lane swap meta. So.
Okay. All right. I don't really have much else to ask about Ever, because I don't really know much about them. Again, the last time I saw them was at IEM. Yeah. So, you know, the meta has changed since then. There's a lot of things up in the air, and I kind of don't really know how they're. I'm not really quite sure about their weaknesses, aside from the fact that, you know, Keed has only recently rejoined the team, and that they have a different mid laner. But okay, so so let's move on to, I guess, RNG. Now, RNG, it's funny that we're not ranking them a little bit higher, just because they're sort of, I want to say, gassed up by a few people. Not that they're bad by any means, it's just a lot of the teams in this tournament are sort of like in the middle of their respective leagues, aside from like CLG, who's second place, and QG and RNG, which are the top two teams in China. Everyone else is like in the middle somewhere.
Technically, Royal is tied with IG. So that right there.
Yeah, okay, so that's the thing. We have to, context is really important. So, okay, so RNG, I don't remember, I believe, like, I skimmed through the description for the little blurb for RNG, and it's sort of like they're like a Diet Coke version of how Samsung White used to play, where, you know, Mata has like this, like,
Diet Coke where like the flavoring was kind of distilled and watered down, and
yeah, basically, yeah, exactly. Like, we didn't. Thank you for elaborating. basically the taste is water. Okay, so Mata is sort of having his renaissance, which to me believes he just like woke up one morning and decided not to be a terrible human being.
To quote him,
Uh,
I want to feel the championship feeling again because Imp and Pawn won OPL last year. So basically, he just doesn't want Imp and Pawn to have something over him. And this is the entire motivating factor behind Royal Never Give Up. Congratulations.
Sounds like
okay, so Looper is performing like really well this play, which you know speaks to the fact that he can't make his own decisions and needs a really dominant personality telling him what to do. We have the other three Chinese members sort of doing their own thing with the three of them. The way they operate is very interesting to me. I like RNG the fact that it's just like the Koreans do their thing, the Chinese do their thing, and it sort of like comes together into their victories. They're very
an unholy mess.
yeah. I it's interesting, but it seems to me that people are sort of like getting a little too excited about them because remember, it's still China. China's like is like sort of like just sweeping like the ashes off of what was probably like the like a terrible Worlds performance, like a terrible like off season. Like there was like no good like the roster moves were kind of just like eh. Okay, so RNG. Why, Kelsey? You have very strong thoughts about this. Why? You know what? Let's just cut to the chase. Why should people not be dick riding them so hard?
Uh, Royal, I think, have a very simple formula, and that's not always a bad thing. One could argue that last year SK Telecom had a very simple formula, right? But I think Royal Never Give Up's very simple formula is easy to exploit, and there's only really been one team in China that's actually done that, and it's Team WE that has effectively exploited their very simple formula. And this simple formula is, hey guys, it's 20 minutes into the game, let's go for Baron. So they average a 25-minute first Baron, and this isn't only instances where Royal Never Give Up get the first Baron of the game. I'm talking about the first time Royal will never give up get Baron generally. So if an enemy team gets Baron first at like 22 minutes and Royal never gets like the first two Barons at 22 minutes and then one at like 32 minutes and then Royal finally get one at 40, that's averaged in there. So their first Baron time, given that, is still 25 minutes across the games they've played. So that should tell you it's like 20 minutes on the dot. Okay, motherfuckers, let's go. So this is kind of the way that Royal operate, and people say that they have a very tight early game and a strong early game control, and I think that that's where most of their improvements have been in the past 2 weeks, because if you average their gold lead at 10 minutes within the first 3 weeks of their play, they actually averaged a deficit. And part of this was that MLXG just sometimes does things. Like, that's the best way to explain MLXG, is that he's such an odd player, because he can be really, really, really good under certain circumstances. For example, Kid invading his jungle and feeding, it's a great circumstance for MLXG to be great, because he'll take that advantage and he'll go bottom, he'll go top, he'll do all this stuff, and he's suddenly really opened up. But I feel like MLXG is the kind of player where if he doesn't get that kind of advantage, he gets lost, or he will play too aggressively trying to make up for it, or he'll just farm some games, and he doesn't ward the best. He sometimes will even build Chilling Smite, which people like Peanut, they build skirmishers, right? They build Red Smite, and why, like, if you want to be an aggressive jungler, first of all, why are you not building Tracking Knife? But if you want to be an aggressive jungler, why are you building Blue Smite? So this is my feeling about this team. I think one thing that's really interesting about Royal and QG is that they don't necessarily lane swap in the way that we consider correct.
Mm-hmm.
But Royal can. I have seen games where they do the, fast push, swap the lane, go fast push bottom. They just don't do it a lot because other teams don't tend to do it against them. But one thing that they have started doing in the past 2 weeks is they've started really playing off advantages they can get in their bottom lane, which Mata, as we remember, very lane dominant support. So what they do is they put scouting wards now. In the past 2 weeks, they've started placing scouting wards for lane swap, which very few teams in the LPL do. Most of them are just blind swapping if they're swapping at all. So they place these scouting wards, and they see the duo lane go somewhere. So actually, they have a pretty high tendency to send their duo lane top, because if they think you're going to swap, they want to swap back on you, right? So Royal Never Give Up tend to try to play to get the 2v2 as much as possible. And then they use Mata to really get the team ahead. And even though Royal only lane swap in 33% of their games, they actually have the third fastest first turret take in the league because just of how dominant their duo lane is. So that's something that's difficult to work against, and if that's something that if Royal do better than I expected them to do, and if they end up in the final or whatever, then it'll probably be off of their ability to play around their bottom lane. But the rest of the team, I just feel is really awkward most of the time.
So they're in a pretty... Okay, so I'd say in the bracket they're in their... I'd say they're the favorites to qualify.
I don't know. Honestly, for me, I have no fucking idea. It's so hard.
Do you think that any of the teams in their bracket would have the capability of exploiting their playstyle?
I think actually Origen, because they do have a fairly strong duo lane. Royal's strategy of trying to get the 2v2 is not going to be effective. I also think that Origen can just do something like Unicorns of Love like to do, which is they blind rush to the top turret and then they hug top turret and they say, "Oh, you can't tell if we swapped or not. Ha 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 ha." And so the Origen can just get a lane swap and completely destroy that sort of style that they like to execute. And of course, we already talked about how Origen love Baron. So for me, as long as Origen show up at the right time, they have a decent chance of removing Royal's main mechanism for success.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment about Royal Never Gives Up?
Sorry, I have very strong feelings.
I know, which is why I couldn't wait to get to them.
We're talking about a Chinese team on China Talk finally.
China.
You know?
Okay, so let's move on. How many teams left? I think 3 teams, correct? Yeah. Okay. So I'd say the 3 remaining teams, I believe for the 3 of you have been a sort of toss up, and it's between SKT, CLG, and QG. Now let's just So who for you would be the third strongest of these 3 teams?
It's really hard. I think QG and CLG are actually really close.
You know what? Let's just do CLG. Okay, so CLG, I feel like a lot of people weren't really sure about this team going into the split, just because it's like a lot of people are very married to the idea that CLG is Doublelift and Doublelift is CLG. So much for that. So of the 7 weeks thus far it's been 7 weeks, right? And then at LCS, half of those weeks they've sort of gone even, but this last week in particular they went 2-0, and it was against the top 2 teams of the league, and that was Immortals, who have until then gone undefeated, and Cloud9. Now they seem to be in pretty good form. Xmithy probably seems to me to be, the strongest he's been in a while. What's his name? Stixay?
Stixay.
Mm-hmm.
Stixay. He's not
Stixay.
he's not like the star of the team. He hasn't like fulfilled this all-star role that Doublelift sort of had when he was on this team. But it doesn't seem to be a big deal because Darshan has sort of taken up that mantle, and of course, Afromu is still, he's had inconsistent problems with inconsistency in his performances before, but he seems to be on an upswing right now. So to me, these are the three people that are sort of like the force of this team right now, with their carries being like the supportive role. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's the gold distribution is split fairly evenly between Stixay, Hui, and Darshan at 24%, 23%, and 22% in that order. So they're actually they went from being bot lane heavily bot lane focused to the point where Doublelift received 30% of the team's resources to being very evenly split between bot, mid, and top.
Which means that top is much higher probably for this team than most other teams in the league. So.
Yep, because they really rely on, and previously it was just a 4-1 split push, and now they have kind of evolved, this past week they evolved that into the 1-3-1 with Xmithy on Udyr, and they just he gets to this unkillable status where he can also split push a lane as well. So it's, I don't know, I really like this team a lot because I think they are a smart team and they know how to trade objectives very well. My only cause for concern about them is probably Huhi, and I know Steven has strong opinions on that, so I kind of hand it over to him.
Okay.
Huhi is not a good mechanical player. As in the last week, me and Emily lost track of how many times he's missed LeBlanc chains and Corki missiles. There was actually this time they were chasing someone through the jungle, and normally you would just Corki just finish him off. No, Ezreal needs to finish him off because he missed the rocket. Regardless, okay. So the thing about CLG is it's true that yes, the gold distribution is more even across the board now than it was before when they had Doublelift. But the interesting thing is I don't really know if I would even call Doublelift an all-star AD carry as of how they played last split, even when they won NALCS, because they played more team-oriented that split compared to other splits. So even though they were funneling more gold than Doublelift, he was playing Sivir and playing more team-oriented anyway. So now that they have an AD carry like 60 who doesn't necessarily need that all the gold funneled into them, well, now the team can actually get pretty team-oriented in gold and team fighting. So it actually works kind of better in that sense, because they're already playing that way. Now the gold values are just being reflected in that play.
Okay, so I need to ask. So, okay, Huhi is not a particularly spectacular player. So, what is it about this team that has them as favorites to possibly take this title, Steven?
Well, I've talked to some people, but I don't have intimate knowledge of how the team works or anything like that. But from what I understand, Huhi is really, really vocal. Sorry, I think I said Huhi. Huhi is really, really vocal in team comms. So even if he's not Pole Vaulter, even if he's not what Pole Vaulter was to the team before, and he's missing a lot of skill shots, he is undoubtedly important to how the team works and functions in game. So is he this new mastermind? Is he the new high? No, I'm not going to say that. But he is important, and the way the team works is Emily said, they know how to play the map. And if they know how to play the map and work as a team, then Huhi can hit whatever point and click skills he has, and then pray for the best of the rest of his skills. But seriously, Afro is playing really well right now. 6A is playing really well right now. Darshan's playing really well. Xmithy is the backbone that no one likes to mention or care about ever since he missed that Sejuani ult a whole year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they're a solid 5-man unit, and that's what works for them, and that's what makes them a really good team.
I have a question. Is Huhi Dunzo?
Yeah. No, I don't think he's fun, but if he's actually useful for team cons, I'm sure he's fun.
Okay.
The thing
Okay,
with Huey
so-
is
That
like,
was the
okay,
important
I
question.
like to poop on Huey, but I will say this: he has like his good games and his bad games. He's just the type of player that when he's having like an off day, you will be able to see it because it will be evidenced by his mechanics. And that's why it's really easy to point out like his flaws because they're just very visually obvious. I think one thing that is really important about this team that happened recently, and a lot of it does have to do with Xsmithy, kind of stepping out and like I guess continuing to be the backbone, but also being slightly more aggressive early on, along with Aframu, who's been doing a really good job of harassing opponents to stop their early jungle routes. Is he has, because he's been a lot more proactive early. Previously in the NALCS, you had these teams that were just like Cloud9, for example. They run on the fact that they're proactive and they're going to be very decisive. And teams like CLG, who previously played a little bit more passively, it almost seemed like they had this like checklist of things to do to have like a good game. And I don't think that's bad because one of their strengths is that they're a really disciplined team that knows how to play the map well. But I think sometimes they get so caught up in kind of checking off objectives, they wouldn't recognize advantages that their opponents were giving them through either like needless aggression or whatever. So I think one thing that's really, really helped with like Smithy and Afro's recent proactivity is that they've really been punishing opponents a lot more for their mistakes, which is something that's really great to see out of this team.
You'd think
Also,
that
to build on the Huhi thing, sorry, just like the short thing, me and Emily harp on him missing skill shots, but it's not to say that like he just gets caught out of position and just feeds out of his mind. He knows when to go in. He knows how to teamfight the theory, but it's like the execution is like he'll just like throw the, like he knows the form of like of shooting a free throw, but like he won't do it right or something with it. Like he's solid, but messes up mechanically in small ways every now and then.
Okay, that's a sweet way of saying it. Okay, so their group, the bracket B is like the more stacked of the two. I think it's fair to say. Why is it? What is it about them? Do you think that they can overcome the other teams in that bracket, like, or at least have the possibility to?
CLG. Well, they'll probably lose to SKT, which is who they're up against first.
If they play proactively enough, see, I feel like it will be difficult for them to come. They may come into contact with QG because if it goes the way I think the bracket will go, it'll be SKT beats CLG, QG beats Fnatic, CLG beats Fnatic, QG loses to SK Telecom, QG and CLG decide who the last team is that gets out of the group.
Yeah.
So I think that will be a really interesting matchup. I think the QG versus CLG interaction is really interesting because I think QG's playstyle naturally counters teams that like to have split pushing tops, but they also don't necessarily play off of the advantages they get off of countering split pushing tops extremely well, if that makes sense. So they'll be able to get an advantage on their top laner by using their double freeze method, but they aren't the best at playing around their own top laner. So even if they get an advantage on V, they won't use it effectively through the teleport or anything like that. So it's really an interesting matchup. So that's, and also Emily has said that she thinks QG's team fighting is better than CLG's. I don't watch CLG's team fighting a lot. I mostly pay attention to their early games, so I don't actually know. But I would say, since QG are good at team fighting, that they're probably pretty decent.
Okay, so now let's get to, okay, speaking of QG, let's get to QG, who only know how to team fight. Only. And this is that's why they're ranked so, okay, no. Okay, so LoL Esports has ranked them really low, which, I mean, to me, I don't mind at this point ranking a Chinese team low just because the region itself isn't like it doesn't really have the best of credits right now. But what left a really weird taste in my mind was just ranking like RNG that much higher than them. So which I found a little odd. Like I know they beat them, but I mean, come on. So so I think it's like a consensus here that QG are actually better than people expect them to be. And you know, there's okay, yes, they're good at team fighting, but they're not the QG of yesterday, which, you know, sort of just let things just naturally occur and then just like won through team fights. There's like a method to their madness now. They they know how to lane swap.
Theoretically,
Theoretically,
this is my argument where people think I'm doing a little bit of mental gymnastics, but I don't know. Just keep talking. We'll get to it.
well, okay, so you know, right now I'd say that every player is doing really well. Moore, who was once the weak link of the team, has been surprisingly good. Peko is probably gets the award for most improved. Like he was not that he was ever bad, but he was always like almost like a wallflower. And here you have him just like probably the best AD carry in the region right now. And you know, you have Doinb who is once, you know, just Doinb who I'd say Doinb is still Doinb, but is like he's Doinb 2.0. Like same features as Doinb, but like he has like a few new apps to him. Like Swift.
He's cleaned out his Nautilus mid app. Like finally put that one in the trash.
Yeah,
you know?
like well, let's not break the hearts of those who enjoyed his Nautilus mid. Okay, and
there's Nautilus.
Basically every player on this team right now is sort of like in the best form that we've seen them. I think I'd say Swift is about the same, but I believe he's not as selfish as he was before. I haven't looked at like gold distribution and stuff, but I think it's fair to say that he's sort of given up a little bit, right?
He has the highest gold distribution of junglers in the league.
Okay, I didn't say the league. I see it has like the team has the goal percentage of the like did it go from like 99.9 to like maybe 98?
QG was always fairly well distributed just because they team fought a lot, so a lot of the players were involved when there would be these massive kills, so it always used to be somewhat even. I would say that it's very interesting because since Moore roams so much, he actually gets very little gold. So he has the lowest gold percentage of any support in the league, and it's very... Otherwise, I feel like the carries are fairly even across the board. Peko, V... Like, V is the surprising one, because V was always, like, a sunken... It was like seeing an actual V on the gold distribution chart at the top, because it would be... No, that's actually where his name comes from, Kelsey. No, but they actually have... He's about average for the league for gold distribution at top, and then 80 carry, and Doinb is a little bit below.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty evenly distributed, but Swift, of course...
So...
20.8% of team gold for a jungler is pretty substantial.
Okay, so what makes this team so good, and why do they have better chances of winning IEM than most people think?
So this is the reason why I talk about their lane swapping is because I think that they understand the general Season 6 mechanism based on the strategies they bring out in the early game. The first time I started looking at this was when they would pick Nautilus top. They were one of the first teams to pick the Nautilus top. And they had Misfortune 80 carry, and this was on 5.24 still. So they would rotate when enemy teams would try to do the fast push lane where they would get the 3 in the top, they would rotate their top laner and their support to the lane that the enemy team was pushing, right? In the 3v0. And they would hold out with using Nautilus to wave clear and more on Alistar to like kind of keep people off of the turret. So they would actually hold the turret with the Nautilus. And Pekko would freeze farm the bot lane, right? With Misfortune, so he would rush level 6 as Misfortune to get the Misfortune ult. And they had one game where they executed this very well, where they would just rotated mid and use the threat of this Misfortune ult extremely early on in the game to get the mid turret. So this was the first sort of counter lane swap strategy that they put out. Another one I've noticed them do is they'll take mid TP, because we all know that QG love mid TP, and they'll have V in the top lane, and V will be, oh no, I am a defenseless top laner, you're going to dive me, and suddenly Doinb appears. Who saw that coming? Where it's
Nice narrative.
but their most
I was shocked.
their most frequently used strategies right now is they'll opt into the initial turret trade. So they'll trade top turret for bot turret, and usually what happens then is that you swap your duo lane again, and they take the other first tier turret. But what they'll do is they'll just leave Pekko. They'll just put Pekko down by himself in the lane, or they've done this with UZI. Sometimes they do it with V, but they'll put someone in the solo lane by himself, and they'll have him freeze that lane, right? And they'll sometimes even let the other turret fall. And when they let the other turret fall, it's really interesting because they'll put V in that lane, and they'll both be freezing these side waves, right? And then they'll have more roam a lot and put wards down. So when people try to get to V and Pekko, they can't really, because the rest of the team is there to defend them. So in this way, they managed to do something really complicated, which I think people don't really see, which is to control the wave at a certain speed. And sometimes they play with this speed, so they'll do a fast push, or they'll do like a slow push, and they'll push the minions up at such a way where I actually, in the second Royal game, was really well done, and I can't believe they actually lost this game off team fighting. Because they had a pretty good lead based on this strategy, was that they pushed up the minions, so Looper came to answer the fast push, and V was pushing. If you watch the timing of V's push, he actually doesn't get to the top until like the exact time when Looper then rotates top, and they've killed Looper at this point a couple of times. So it's really interesting to see how they're able to time these pushes. And this is something that no one ever talks about, right? They just focus on QG's team fighting. So this is why I think that they're a very creative team. Yes, I find that the fact that they weirdly seem to stubbornly avoid the way that you're supposed to lane swap a bit infuriating, because I think that's exploitable. I think you can get advantages, punish that really hard, and they usually fall behind in gold. The only team in the league that averages a lower gold deficit than QG is LGD, and anyone who's seen it at 10 minutes, and anyone who has seen an LGD game knows that this is not a good sign, right? That we're comparing their gold lead at gold deficit at 10. So yeah, I think that this is going to be something that's really easily exploitable, and that's why I'm not saying they're going to win the tournament, because I don't think they will. That's why I'm saying CLG can beat them, because this is definitely a weakness that they have. But I do think that when they execute it well, and they can get it off, it can be very surprising. Even though they average these deficits, the reason why like their gold distribution is fairly even is because they're able to get leads on Pekko and V individually. This makes their team fighting surprising, because even though the enemy team might have a lot of global gold, they don't have carries that are as threatening. Pekko and V both average CS leads at 10 minutes, which is something that's never happened. Actually, V is second in the league for CS at 10 minutes. That has never happened before, right? So you have Zatai and V, and they're both ahead of Flandra. Like, what is Flandra even doing that these, like, terrible top laners. No.
This isn't about him. Please don't drag Flandre into this.
But for me, this is the most interesting thing about QG, right? Is the way that they're trying to find a way around the current lane swap meta, that they're trying to be creative and strategic, not their team fighting, which is also quite good. But if Royal cannot team fight you, it's fine. I mean, I also think UZI is weird.
Okay, they're not.
We're not gonna talk.
Probably.
Well, he's there. He bought
He's there with Echo,
He is. Oh,
yeah. He bought the entire team ice cream. There, he's like, please let me play a
Maybe that's
game,
why-
please.
Okay. So I think you've like exhausted like. QG.
Sorry, I just
No, it's so.
if
no, it's
someone
okay.
wants to talk about their team fighting, there's a lot of interesting things to say about their team fighting. But I mean, it
Yeah,
is
sure.
China talk, okay? So
Yeah. Okay. So I think we can move on. We can like safely move on to SKT since we've like really.
I won't say anything about SKT. I promise. I'll just be quiet the entire time.
No, it's okay. It's just It's okay. So SKT, they are middle of the pack in Korea, which is sort of surprising. I mean, at least last year they waited a season before they decided to become bad. But I mean, to be fair, they've lost like they had a pretty decent overhaul of their roster. They're trying. The meta doesn't seem to be in their favor. Their junglers seem to both have clocked out of this world. Strangely enough, I think it's a consensus that despite this, they still have the highest chance of winning the tournament because they are in the most competitive league right now, and much like IEM Katowice in 2014 when KTB was there.
KTB.
Yeah, when KTB was there, they were like doing horribly in OGN. Just sweep the tournament, just like that. So I feel like something like that, something in similar fashion can happen this time. Maybe they can drop a game at some point, but I think it's still safe to say that SKT do have pretty good odds of making it out. Now, they're going with Blank, who is, you'd think like, oh, we're not bringing Bengi, that Blank is not an improvement. But I mean, Emily, what are your thoughts on SKT? And regardless of their like very mediocre play at the moment, can still like pull off a victory here?
I mean, the weird thing about them right now, and the reason why like I don't necessarily disagree with the Blank choice, even though I don't think Blank has done well for them as a jungler, is that it's not like Bengi has done particularly well for them as a jungler lately either. This meta has been really bad for Bengi when it comes to how his role or like what his role has kind of always been on that team. And I know a lot of people take issue with the fact that I say Bengi has only performed well on Elise. And what I mean by
Emily,
that
Gragas is coming back into the meta.
By a lot of people, you mean Gozikboy. Okay.
No, there are other people that take issue with it. But basically by that, what I'm saying is I'm not saying that Bengi can't play other champions in the least. What I'm saying is what he likes to do is invade his opponent's jungle and place deep vision so that basically SKT can kind of keep their lanes pushing and then take advantages elsewhere. So last year, for example, you saw him do this, and then he would go up to top lane and gank for Martin, try to get Martin ahead. Previously in Season 3, you saw him constantly be in Faker's lane, so they always wanted to get Faker ahead. And now Bengi just seems really lost in the current jungle meta, and he's tried a few things that just like really haven't made any sense. Like the Udyr pick really didn't, like, you know how we were talking about Xmithy and how this Udyr kind of unlocked this new 1-3-1 split push for CLG, and they were doing these really great things with Aphromoo harassing the opposing jungler on their routes so they could delay them, and again, just like get this Meteor ahead to this kind of unkillable level. That didn't work for Bengi, and it just ended up being really, really not good. In their series against Guangzhou, who actually just lost earlier today, so in like spectacular fashion. But no, what my point is, like, Longzhu they're still a team trying to figure stuff out too, and even against them, SK Telecom was kind of trying these new things, and it didn't really work out so well for Bengi. So do I think that Blank is like they're suddenly going to be able to insert him and be like a super team again, or he's just going to be this incredible carry jungler or whatever? I don't think that at all. But I think even this, like, I don't think it's a particular loss because of how Bengi's been unable to kind of do his thing lately. And it has suffered the team. So I would presume that their thought process is kind of like, well, it's a bit the same either way, and we need to find some sort of player who can replace Bengi eventually. So
do you think
why
Blank
not try Blank?
Do you think Blank is a suitable substitute in the long run?
He hasn't shown anything thus far that would tell me, like, he looked better on Starhorn Royal Club last year than he has.
Okay, so
yeah, that team's a dumpster fire.
Basically, he's SK Telecom's fire lolly.
Pretty much.
Okay, so regardless of Blank shows up or not, can SK Telecom successfully 4v5 their way through the tournament?
I mean, you're putting it that way, but yeah, like, I did pick them to win this tournament.
Okay,
I think that, like, for example, you see how they did win their one game against the Tigers, and they pick these like late game scaling compositions for Bang, and they focus a bit more on Bang and then Faker. And the really interesting thing for that game specifically for me is that they won via team fighting, which is usually like Rox's thing. And to be fair, the Tigers made a couple of mistakes that SK Telecom were able to take advantage of and get to that point. But I thought it was a different side of the team that I hadn't seen before, so it definitely drew my attention, and it was very interesting. And I think Bang is still having a very, very good season, as is Faker. And with the two of them on that team, I think they should be able to.
So would it be fair to say that their win conditions would be to just make sure Faker and Bang are ahead of their opponents, so they could successfully carry?
Pretty much, yeah. Because they've also had a lot of trouble fitting Duke into the team, and while he's had a couple games as like a dueling split pusher, they've been few and far between. So I think they're still kind of struggling to integrate him into the communication system.
Okay.
So yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to say about SK Telecom? Steven, Kelsey?
I haven't watched as much Korea as I would have liked to this season, so I'll defer to Emily.
Okay, what about you, Kelsey?
I think SK Telecom, for me, I agonized over this who I think would win this tournament a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I still am not 100% comfortable saying SK Telecom will win, just because I do think that the problem just in general with this tournament is
you
that they're...
picked it for your preview.
Well, I'm saying I will, but I'm still not 100% comfortable saying it. Just because the thing with this tournament in general is I feel like there are a lot of teams where if you rate them on their ceiling, you know, they're in a certain position, but they also have these really bad lows, right? Mm-hmm. I think this is true for a lot of these teams. So if SK Telecom play to above their average, they should win this, right? If they play to their average, it's probably going to be close. If they play below average, they're probably going to lose. So that's how I feel about it. Same, you could say the same thing about QG though. CLG I think are probably more consistent, but their level is probably not to SK Telecom's above average or
So you
QG's above
think that
average. So
you think of the three teams that you have the highest chance with CLG, while they might not have the highest ceiling, they are currently like closer to their ceiling as opposed to CSK Telecom, who has a high ceiling but isn't really like
yeah, I'm
close
not
to
really
it.
sure what CLG's ceiling is, but I would say they're close to being able to replicate the highest level that they've shown us more consistently than SKT or QG, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay, so I think so we've gone through the teams and we've sort of I guess we've ranked them according to us. So we sort of have it where it's like it's sort of like SK Telecom, then like a tie between QG and CLG, followed by, I guess, would you guys tie ever in RNG?
Ever RNG and FNC is kind of together.
Yeah.
And then like anyone else, just like it doesn't matter to you?
More or less.
Origen and GSM, woo!
Okay, so
I feel like when
Okay,
we're debating between the top three who's gonna win, we're talking about like who like a betting race or something like.
And even for me, it isn't necessarily out of the question for a team as low as Royal or Ever to win this tournament that we've ranked as that low, just because I feel like the incline is kind of you can't see my hand, but it's like gradually going up as opposed to being very steep like the way it was at Worlds, where you have SK Telecom and if LGD and EDG had played like actual teams, and then everyone else at the bottom.
still a little resentful. I know, me too.
Well, I mean, just look at where LGD are positioned in the league now. Come on!
I don't want to think about it. I have to see it every
Okay.
week. Okay, so let's go through the brackets now.
Not this week, though, thank God.
Fingers crossed. Okay, let's thank our blessings. Okay, so Group A, Round 1. Ever versus TSM. What do we think?
Ever. I mean, there's always a chance that TSM will beat them, but like, it's like I said earlier, like they're just inconsistent across the board. Like, I honestly have no idea how TSM is gonna perform.
Yeah,
No.
it's their total coin flip.
I think, yeah, probably Ever, just because they do seem to have a more established system, but it's hard to say.
What would you say the win conditions for each team is for in this matchup?
Let's say TSM. Oh my god. Okay, for
I'm trying
TSM
to figure out a way to word it.
Yeah, like, oh god, they're so inconsistent. I think what they'd have to do is they'd have to get double lift ahead, because that's kind of what they've committed to, right? With double lift on the team, they've kind of like either consciously or subconsciously, they've committed to playing a bit more around their bot lane. And so I think they have to get double lift ahead. Either Bjergsen or Hanser will be the secondary carry. I know that Hanser has looked kind of awkward, especially in his rotations with TSM, but where I think people kind of underestimate him is his team fighting. Like, as early as Gravity, he had a really good understanding of where to be and, like, when to use his skills specifically in team fights, even though obviously he wasn't receiving any sort of direction while on that team whatsoever. And they were kind of a weird team to watch in general. But I do think that he still has that skill set. And that's one of the reasons why I really like him as top laner in general. So if they can get double lift, if they can get some gold onto double lift, some secondary gold onto like Bjergsen, and then Hanser is able to group up for team fights, that's maybe how they'd be able to win. If they can I guess, oh no. They'd also have to recognize when to take objectives a bit better.
Okay. I didn't say like fix the team, Emily. I said new additions. All right, Ever.
Get crazy ahead. Put Key in a position where he can make plays and follow up on his playmaking. Use teleports and stuff.
Yeah, use global pressure.
Lots of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Use
Stuff
it.
is good.
All
Stuff is
right.
better. Than
Okay, so Origin versus RNG.
I actually find this one really interesting. I think it's like 60-40 Royal Origin. As weird as that sounds, just because of the way both teams play. I think that, yeah, Origin just land swap and avoid letting them exert a lot of pressure off of their bottom lane, getting ridiculously ahead, and show up for Baron. Don't throw too hard around Baron. Royal is get the 2v2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Set up a good split push with Looper so that he's constantly putting pressure on Soaz if possible. Looper's weird because he goes exactly even like every single game, but it's fine. Yeah. That's pretty much
Okay,
it.
I'm almost afraid to ask like hypotheticals. It's like, oh, like hypothetically, like Ever versus hypothetically. Okay, so instead of like guessing round two, why don't we just guess? So this is, I'm also even scared to ask this. So you have to pick two teams of this group to bracket to qualify. You can tell me it's
saying, honestly, I think any of these four teams
yeah,
can make it out of this bracket. Like, you could tell me, because I know people are going to come back and look at this and use it to send me death threats or whatever, but, like,
I mean, to be fair, like, if sending you death threats is like a national pastime at this point.
Yeah, true. So, I
anyone
mean,
who... Go on.
like, this group is so weird. I still will say Ever and RNG, but like I'm very hesitant to even call that because you could tell me any of these two teams made it out and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay,
yeah.
Kelsey.
I pretty much agree with everything Emily said.
Ever and RNG?
Yeah, I will say I think it's slightly more likely Origin make it out than TSM, but other than that.
Okay, so what about you, Steven? Who are your two picks for qualifying in this group?
Origin. And TSM. Yeah. I mean, not TSM,
Origin.
Ever.
Origin and Ever?
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. He doesn't like Royal at all, apparently.
You don't like Royal
Rip.
either?
Well, I do, but I think they'll make it out, actually. But, yeah.
Okay. Alright, so Group B, SK Telecom CLG.
There's some fun bottom lanes in this in Group A. I will say that. There's some really fun bottom lanes, you know?
There are fun bottom lanes in Group A.
Yeah. So that's
But
cute. Anyway.
It's very cute. Okay, Group B. SK Telecom versus CLG.
I wanted to say something about Doinb versus Huhi, because I think it's really funny.
Good lord.
Why?
Because of the way Doinb plays. Doinb, I think, is really crazy, because when you watch him, a lot of times he'd just rather harass the enemy mid laner than farm.
That's true. He'll just like ignore creeps and just like auto and like cast spells.
So
and it's sort of like your creep wipe. It's just like no, I'm doing this.
he's actually really bad at farming, which is really funny. But I'm just trying to imagine how Huhi would respond to that.
I don't think you really know what to do.
He'd probably just be really confused.
Do you know like that one strategy they tell you in a fight to just like scare your opponent by being crazy? Doinb's dad told him that, and he applied that to everything in his life, even League of Legends.
I just remember this great quote from Alex Ish from actually IEM Katowice 2014. Mm-hmm. This was after Gambit lost to Taipei Assassins. He says, Chinese mids, they're just, well, first of all, apologize to the Taiwanese, right? Because he called them Chinese, but Chinese mids, they just play full YOLO. They use all the spells like there's no jungler. So, Doinb has gone full Chinese mid. Anyway, let's go.
All right, so SK Telecom versus CLG.
SKT would win that one. most
All right,
likely.
so what are the win conditions for both teams?
SKT has to not be
SK
boosted.
Telecom. SK what?
SKT has to not be boosted.
That's their that's their win condition.
That's their-
Oh, good.
I
I think
don't
if
really know.
SKT play like kind of like Kelsey put it earlier, like if they play at their average or above average, they will beat CLG. I think the thing you have to ask is how does CLG win this? And
Well, I
they
mean
can
that
do
was the
by
question too.
taking advantage of blank in the jungle and
Mhm.
doing something very similar to what they did to Reignover in their game against Immortals, where you just have Aphromu harassing him in his own jungle. And again, that also depends on like whether they lane swap and where the jungle starts end up. But that's how they would do it. They'd want to get Xsmithy and Darshan ahead and try to be able to set up the split push as fast as possible.
I think the other weakness, we talked a lot about the jungle, but I think not that Duke is a bad player, but he's just seemed really cut off from the rest of the team at times. So taking advantage of that has been the way a lot of Korean teams have beaten them.
Okay. So Fnatic versus Chaogu.
Sorry.
I'm thinking of a Spirit meme right now.
Yes, I'm thinking about Spirit. But for those who didn't check it out, in Cologne, IEM Cologne, I wrote this big article about Spirit versus Swift. And I effectively said Spirit is a good player, but QG is a better player, but QG play better around Swift than WE have played around Spirit. And I feel that this is actually still kind of true. Spirit is a really good player, but he's just not a team player right now. And Fnatic don't play around him either, which they shouldn't. I think Spirit needs to be the one who
Needs to conform to them.
changes. So just, and we haven't really, it's funny because I talked a lot about QG's side lanes, but Swift I didn't necessarily talk about, but I think he's also a big reason why they play their lane swap strategy the way they do. Unless he's playing Rek'Sai, he just farms. And when he's playing Rek'Sai, sometimes he over-aggresses on when they haven't reached their power spikes. So Spirit has Swift has two modes, which is either go, go, go when he's playing Rek'Sai, or he has farm, farm, farm on pretty much anything else. So I think that's going to be something to look at. Just play the... It's hard because Fnatic isn't a team either that has been playing aggressively early. They've actually also been playing like the Kog'Maws and stuff and trying to scale. So it's just not a good matchup for Fnatic in the way that they've been playing. But if they want to, I think they need to clear. They need to get early sweepers, try to remove some of QG's vision, and isolate some of their side lanes when they're split pushing, or try to isolate Swift in the jungle. And I think that's the best way to approach this matchup from Fnatic's angle. Otherwise, QG, play the way QG do. Try not to engage too early and to do many dumb things, and there you go.
All right, so QG. So who's your pick for this matchup?
QG, I think.
What about you, Emily?
Yeah, I'd say QG.
Steven?
QG.
Okay. So who are the two teams who you think are making it out of this bracket?
I plead the fifth.
plead. You can't plead the fifth.
You
It's
don't
not a
get
criminal
to
case.
plead anything.
Kelsey, you don't
It's not a
even
criminal
live
case. You can't plead the fifth.
in America anymore.
Yeah, you're in
There are
China.
Chinese plead
Remember,
the fifth.
they gave you asylum.
Is Chinese pleading the fifth just like at turning off your VPN?
So, yeah, SK Telecom. That's all I'm gonna say.
You don't know, and the second team you can't decide.
I don't know. CLG or QG, probably not Fnatic.
Okay, Emily,
Hmm.
please don't please pick
Ugh.
two teams.
Hey, that's not fair. If you called me
And-
first, then maybe I wouldn't have picked a second team.
Andy is holding
well,
me in
but-
contempt.
But I
you
mean,
know,
you weren't first.
SK Telecom, I guess, like, for the sake of being fun and randomly picking, because, like, it's honestly a huge toss-up between CLG and Chaogu based on the way I think this bracket's going to turn out. I think if/when they do face each other, it's going to be a really interesting game. But since I did my like crazy prediction for the score predictions as like CLG taking it all, I'll even though I think SK Telecom is gonna win. I'll take
liar
SK.
is what you're saying.
Wow.
I know.
All right, so
Hey, they
SK
said like pick something random and crazy that you want to happen. And I was like, sure, okay. I like CLG a lot.
Well, they said bold prediction. It has to be something you actually believe. So I feel like yours is a little strange
I
to
believe
read.
it could happen. I
So
just don't
All right,
think
what about you, Steven?
Let's
Your
get
two
to
picks?
CLG.
Okay, so so basically
Steven just hates China. Wow.
I don't have faith anymore.
Emily, I mean Kelsey.
I had faith last time.
Please tell me who doesn't hate China.
Wow. So
Aside
rude.
from the people in this Skype call, who
Who said I
likes
hate
China?
China?
I do. I feel like they've been beheaded. It's very strange.
Not only have they been headed, the community has put China's head on like a spike so everyone
Well,
could.
I
like,
just mean because LGD and EDG were their heads and they've literally like fallen off and rolled under the table or something.
Wait,
Relax, I haven't
are we
I
putting
haven't
their head
given
on-
up.
the head-
GG.
Are we just hold up? Are we putting their heads on a spike, or are we carrying them around as trophies? Because that's two different hemispheres.
I said
Position.
nothing about this at all. I just said that their heads like randomly fell off. Like
Okay, so what we do with their heads, it hasn't like been decided yet. It's currently being
I thought I
decided.
heard two different things. My bad.
All right, so okay, and there was a basic consensus that of it's probably SK Telecom that are gonna take it, but QG and
you know
CLG.
what? SK
Okay.
Telecom and QG are making it out of the group. Flame me all you want. Actually, you know the way China works is I predict they do well and then they don't because that actually has a direct cause and effect relationship.
But now I'm wondering if the polarities have sort of changed because you were making those predictions from the United States, and maybe now that you've fully
I don't think that
integrated
that has anything to do with anything, no.
okay,
But I do think QG versus CLG is really close.
okay.
It's definitely the
Yeah, it
hardest
is.
matchup to predict, I think, of any of the possible ones that we've talked about.
All
I wanna
right.
see that game really badly.
Okay, so but overall, so we agreed that it's SKT that has the highest chance of winning, but CLG and QG have. It's not far off to say that they could take the whole thing too. Any final plugs? I know you guys have written stuff.
I wrote previews for IEM and a bunch of stuff, so scoreesports.com.
Wow.
Okay. Steven, you're not supposed to sound so excited. You write for Esports Heaven.
Oh,
Emily?
Yeah, I guess.
He's our rival. I also wrote previews, two of which are coming out today. One on Ever Later, and then the NA one was just released. And I wrote an SK Telecom preview that came out yesterday, and I'll be writing stuff throughout the week. So
Okay. Steven, are you written anything or writing anything that we should keep our eyes peeled for?
I've been doing LJL weekly recaps. LJL being the Japanese league.
Mhm.
I'm finishing up mine from last week's today, but I'll be writing some stuff for IEM as well as the tournament goes on
Yay!
at Esports
Yay.
Hub.
At Esports Heaven. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to. I don't remember the episode. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you don't record something in forever. But you know, I'll say that this was episode 1 of Into the China Talk SVU.
Sounds good.
I am Mariska Hargitay. Good night.